On today's special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Penguins, it's Marc-Andre Fleury night in Pittsburgh. We'll take a look at the game.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into a special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Penguins. Both teams are your daily podcast for the Minnesota Wild and the Pittsburgh Penguins. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Make sure you smash that like button and subscribe on YouTube and follow us on your favorite podcast platforms as well. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode, a look at a big game tonight between the Minnesota Wild and the Pittsburgh Penguins because it's Marc-Andre Fleury night, and so we will talk about Marc-Andre Fleury, who obviously spent a little bit of time in Pittsburgh, just a couple of seasons. So we'll talk about Fleury, we'll talk about where the Pittsburgh Penguins are at right now, and the Minnesota Wilds as they are off to a good start heading into tonight's game. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and we're joined by Hunter and Pat of Locked On Penguins. Gentlemen, first crossover that we've had a chance to do this season, and it's all about Fleury tonight, so glad to have you guys on, and looks like it's been a little bit of a rough go for the Penguins so far this season. Hunter, did you expect when the season started that you'd be where you're at right now and the Penguins would be off to a little bit of a sluggish start?
I mean, I predicted them to miss the playoffs this year. I did not think it was going to look this bad 10 games into the season. You know, they started off the season, at least fine the first 4 games. You had that blowout loss to the Rangers, obviously, but you were able to rebound a little bit those first 4 to 5-ish games. But they've lost now 5 in a row. They can't defend in their own zone to save their lives. They are one of the worst teams in the league in terms of scoring chances allowed at 5-on-5. They're actually the worst team in the league in terms of high danger chances allowed at 5-on-5. They gave up a 2-0 lead to Vancouver in the blink of an eye last game in Western Canada. They were absolutely taken to the woodshed by the Oilers. They gave up another 2-0 lead to the Winnipeg Jets, and then they gave up a 1-goal lead, not once, but twice in the third period against the Calgary Flames before losing in the shootout. So things are going really poorly right now for this team. They're getting the offense so far to start the year. The depth scoring has really been a lot better this year compared to last year. Evgeny Malkin is off to a very hot start, one of the best players in the league to start this season, but they're just not able to keep a puck out of their own net. Tristan Jarry, he's in the AHL getting a conditioning stint just because he's had a really rough start to the season. They're relying on Yoel Blomqvist and Alex Nedeljkovic to carry the load. And Blomqvist, it looks like he is going to get the start tonight against the Wild. Very deserved with the way he has played. I want him to get the 1A minutes over Ned right now. And that's not to say that Ned has been bad this season, but I do think Blomqvist, at least in my opinion, has outplayed Nedeljkovic so far to start the season. But the main thing is they cannot defend right now. And also, Sidney Crosby needs to get going. He's had a really rough start to the season. We've been saying it a little bit. At times, it feels like he looks disinterested. I mean, they're doing everything they can to get his line going. In practice on Monday, Seth, they have Evgeny Malkin, Rickard Rakell on his line. It's very rare when you see Evgeny Malkin play wing in the NHL. It looks like you might see that at least a little bit to start tonight because Crosby has been at least so down to start the season compared to normal. So definitely a lot more of a rough start than I thought. And again, you can lose games to better teams. Like, for example, the game against Toronto earlier in the season, Pat knows that, where the Penguins played fine. They just got beat by a better team. But you can't look lifeless in these losses that they have, especially in these last couple of games. The game against the Rangers to open the season. Those type of losses where the effort, it feels like, isn't there, that's not acceptable to me.
Pat, I'll just have you piggyback off of that. How surprised are you by the start for the Penguins?
To kind of echo what Hunter was saying, I'm surprised at how poorly their defense has looked because similar to Hunter, I predicted they would maybe make the playoffs. I kind of saw them being in the same position they have been the last couple of years, sniffing around a playoff spot, maybe making it, maybe missing again, but being right on that bubble, because you look at their offseason moves, you look at the way they've built this roster and what Kyle Dubas is trying to do with a quick retooling on the fly by getting younger talent, draft picks, and trying to get everybody else who is a core player locked up for the foreseeable future. You can see where the plan is, and that kind of leads you to the point of, all right, they're not trying to win this year, but they're at least trying to be somewhat competitive. So while I'm not surprised that they're in the position that they are, it's genuinely stunning to me to watch their inability to defend, because if there's been a hallmark of this team, especially under Mike Sullivan, it's that they have a system that they know how to play. It is ingrained within them. They have been doing it for a better part of a decade. And while there are some new faces here and there, the main players still mostly remain. So it's not as if they brought in a brand new roster, a ton of new faces, and everybody has to learn this and there's going to be growing pains. It's been genuinely painful to watch because, like Hunter said, offensive zone, the depth is showing up. They're getting goals from lower in the lineup. Evgeny Malkin's off to a phenomenal start, but as soon as the puck crosses the red line into their own zone and then to the blue line into their zone, you wince and just think, oh God, here it comes. And compound that with Tristan Jarry's struggles continuing, Alex Nedeljkovic being fine enough, but not really taking the reins. And Yoel Blomqvist has been in games where he plays really well, but he's getting no help in front of him. So what's it matter? It's a shocking start in how much they're struggling. But if you were to just open the standings page on NHL.com this morning, it wouldn't be all that shocking on its face.
Hunter, let's talk about Sidney Crosby a little bit, because obviously, as you alluded to, he's off to a little bit of a slow start. 37 years old, inked the extension to stay through the 2026-2027 season. So is this just a bit of an off start, or are we starting to you see on your cell phone, Father Time is calling, you just don't want to take the call? Because you look at his numbers last year, he had 94 points, 42 goals, and so still obviously at 36, all cylinders running. What's up with Sidney Crosby this year?
I think now that he's a bit older, since he's in a rut, it's going to take him a little bit longer to get out of it compared to, when he was 25, 26, 27, 28 and all that. It feels like, to me, at least so far this season, I haven't seen him look this disinterested, at times since the end of the Mike Johnson era, to be honest. It's looking that poor right now, just with the way he's playing in his own end. And I feel like offensively, it hasn't helped that his line mates have been kind of rotating throughout the season. He started with Anthony Beauvillier, who I think Beauvillier is okay, but he's not a top line winger at this point in the NHL. He's kind of had a pretty up and down start to the season. You have Brian Rust, who he's a bit banged up right now, but he's kind of had a little bit of an up and down start to the season. They finally put Rickard Rakell up there a little bit last game. Those two have worked really well together in the past. So they're doing any and everything right now to try and get Crosby going. And if this team wants to get back into it this season, they have no choice but to get him going. I mean, he is the engine that makes this team go. And it's unfortunate that Crosby's having this slow start, because Malkin is off to one heck of a start this season, well over a point per game. I felt like if Crosby was close to where Malkin is right now, I mean, they would definitely have, at least, I think, in my opinion, a couple more wins to start the season. But it is very imperative that they get him going here.
Pat, one final one, Penguins wise, and then we'll switch and we'll talk about the Minnesota Wild, and you guys can pepper me with whatever questions come to mind. So, with the fact that this Penguins team's off to a slow start, but you've got Crosby locked in for the next few seasons, Where does Kyle Dubas need to take this roster? Where does he need to take this team for them to be able to contend with the heavyweights in the Eastern Conference?
Well, I think that it's a tough gamble, right? Because you made the joke that is this Crosby's iPhone going off with Father Time calling, and I don't think that's so much the case. Similar to what Hunter said, I think it's a lot of frustration. We talked about this on our show yesterday with Jesse Marshall from The Athletic. You can tell that a combination of the poor defending and some of the defensemen on the team playing below the line, there's frustration seeping into his game. He's not getting clean looks. He's not getting passes into the zone. So that's hurting his game. As for Kyle Dubas, I'm a big fan of what he's trying to do right now, because if you were to open up Puckpedia right now, outside of the big names, everybody is either on a very low money deal, they're on a 1-year deal, it's all extremely tradable, or if they don't work out this year, you can shake hands come April or May and say, hey, thanks for everything. Good luck out there. We'll see you down the road. So for him to get this team back to where they want to go, he's done a good job in stockpiling draft picks, getting some younger talent within the system, and going into this next offseason, just continue with that plan. You know that a guy like Rutger McGroarty is hopefully going to take a next step and be NHL ready either by the end of this season or going into next. You've got a handful of guys in junior and the AHL who will look to take the next step. And then as of this recording, they've got 9 draft picks coming up this offseason, this draft. So what he's trying to do is to get one last influx of young talent to be ready by the end of Crosby's extension, as well as Malkin, Letang, and Carlson, to where they don't have to be world beaters. They don't have to be 80, 90, 100 point players. But if they're 50, 60, 70 point players, and you have a good supporting cast that can put up 30, 40, 50 points along them, you'll have a deep team that can maybe compete with those heavy hitters.
Yeah, and just looking at Puckpedia right now, remarkably clean books for this Penguins team, particularly 2026, 2027. So, yeah, you're spot on in that Kyle Dubas he's keeping the checkbook clean and giving himself a ton of options. We will switch gears and talk about the Minnesota Wild off to a 5-1-2 start. Don't worry, we'll talk plenty of Marc-Andre Fleury before we're done here today. All coming up as we continue today's crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Penguins after this. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So let me just take you through a scenario here. If your $5 bet was on the Washington Commanders against the Chicago Bears, you were sweating bullets in that game because Chicago took the lead late. But turns out if you don't defend the Hail Mary, you're going to have a bad time. And the Commanders were able to get the immaculate reception part 2. And if that was your $5 bet, hey, you came away with $150 in bonus bets just by getting that winner. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's episode also brought to you by Game Time. We are in the full tilt of the fall sports season. You've got the NFL, you've got college football, the NHL, the NBA, all in action, which means that there are no shortage of opportunities for you to see your favorite teams live here over the next few months. And Game Time makes it as easy as possible to find great tickets to see your favorite teams, so you can spend more time worrying about where you're going to tailgate where you're going to go before the game, and more importantly, where you're going to celebrate the win. Game Time has incredible features that make the ticket buying experience as easy as possible. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to today's special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Penguins. Once again, we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Do me a huge favor right now if you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, and if you want to go a step further, turn notifications on so you don't miss any new episodes all throughout the week. All right, Pat. All right, Hunter. Wild time, and so if you guys have any burning wild questions, I'm all ears.
So I guess my question would be this, Seth. Kirill Kaprizov, what size will the statue be? Because holy crap, is this guy off to one heck of a start. Averaging just under 2 points per game. He's got 4 goals, 15 points in 8 games. And it feels like a guy like him, when you put the saddle on him and just let him run, he is going to do absolutely magical things. And what I want to know with him is because obviously there's 32 teams. I only have so many hours in a day. If I could watch every game, I would, but unfortunately I can't. Is this him being that good, or is he part of a better line? Because you can see that there are a lot of players atop the Wild stats page that are producing really well. Is his line just that effective, or is he just knocking it out of the park on his own?
Well, I think it's a nice little 1-2 combo in that Matt Zuccarello has really been impressive so far this season. He kind of tailed off last year because from February on, the primary top line combination was Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, and Joel Eriksson Ek. And so Zuccarello, his production at the end of last season really tailed off. So that was some of the thinking going into this season was, let's put Zuccarello back up there so that we don't have that just kind of tail off at the end of the season. And he has been really, really good. And Marco Rossi has been centering those two and is just an absolute bulldog. He's been great so far this season. But I think the thing that we're seeing so far this year is the amount of attention that teams are putting specifically on Kaprizov. And this was evident in the game against the, I think it was against the Tampa Bay Lightning, it was against the Florida Panthers, excuse me. Kirill had the puck right out in front of the net in the slot area, and he skated it around behind, and there were like 3 Panthers players that went with him. And that leaves one-on-one for Zuccarello and for Rossi both. So Kaprizov kind of takes that attention in, and he finds Zuccarello after Sergei Bobrovsky was one of the players that tried to go with Kirill, which if you're a goalie, it's a unique strategy. So he got completely pulled out of the net. Kaprizov finds Zuccarello, and he's able to bury the goal. Teams are giving a lot of attention to Kirill, and rightfully so. But he is doing a good job of kind of realizing that and allowing his teammates to make plays while they're out there on the ice. Now, at some point, that's going to shift, and teams are going to say, well, this is exactly what he wants. And so we can't send 2 or 3 players at him. We got to just kind of stay home. And then at that point, he's going to start taking those matchups himself. So it's really a like pick your poison. Do we want to try to leave better matchups for his line mates, or do we want to try to take the attack to him? And so far, it doesn't matter what you do. He's going to win both times. And as far as the statue goes, I think it will be a statue and just name the arena after him combo. Just name the franchise. Just rename the franchise the Minnesota Kaprizovs, and I think that would do the justice that is needed for how good he is.
Now, Seth, how much money is he going to get on this next contract? Because that's coming up pretty soon, and I think the price tag is only going to go up the better that he plays. And also, talk about Matt Boldy and the start that he's had this season, 11 points in 8 games, and one more player as well. I feel like the Wild have really needed him to be better this year, and he has. Philip Gustafsson, also with Marc-Andre Fleury. Gustafsson, 922 save percentage to start the season. I feel like he's still the 1A goalie for the Wild right now compared to Fleury. Talk about those two guys and the starts that they've had for the season so far.
Well, the money for Kirill is going to be upwards of 12 to 13 a year. And at this point, it doesn't matter if that number starts with a 1 or a 2. You pay it. Like, yeah. I'm of the belief that even if he would ask for like 20 million a season, which is just, it's an outrageous number, but there's something to be said for keeping a player for a little more than you'd like to and dealing with that, as opposed to letting a franchise icon go and dealing with that. So it's just, to me, obviously it comes down to this team's ability to be competitive. But if it's a simple, hey, we just got to beat this number by this other team, you do it. Like, I don't want to entertain a scenario in which the Wild say, well, we just didn't want to go that high for the salary. Like, no, we're not the Minnesota Twins, so don't worry about that. Now, as far as Matt Boldy goes, off to a great start this year, and is doing all the things that you would like to see from a young player. Boldy's 23 years old, is looked on to be, one of those key pieces for this franchise as they move forward. He's already got a 30-goal season under his belt. He had 29 goals last year. He got off to a pretty slow start, though, and was hurt for the first 19 games of the season. He had 1 goal. After that, 28 goals in the final 56 games of the season. So he definitely turned it up. I think the Wild would like to see a little more consistent numbers for him as opposed to just cold and then not. But he's doing all the little things too, which I really like. He's really engaged in board battles. He is one of the best you'll see at keeping the puck alive and keeping it away from opponents. And so you mix all that stuff together, and it has led to just a really impressive start. And when we interviewed him, he talked about wanting to have those opportunities. I asked him point blank, how do you handle the expectation of being somebody that just has more opportunities put on his plate? And he says, bring it on, which is something that I really enjoyed to hear that from him. And it's showed so far this year that he's ready to rock, and he's playing really well. But I think, as you alluded to, the biggest difference between last year and this year has been the goaltending so far. And Philip Gustafsson is a massive portion of that. He came into camp 13 pounds lighter than he was last year, because conditioning has been a little bit of an issue for him over the last couple of seasons. And so he came in and was in really, really good shape. And it seems like he's moving around in the crease much better, but he also, just the word that I've gone to over and over is decisive. He just has been really decisive with the puck up until the start against Philadelphia. But everybody has a clunker here and there. It's been great to see. And the hope is that he just can continue to, if it is that you have 4 or 5 really good games and then a little bit of a clunker, I think the Wild would take that, because last year it was like 2 good, 3 bad, 3 good, 2 bad, that kind of an uneven spread. And so if he can keep that going, this team is definitely going to be in the mix for a playoff spot.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, and I obviously your listeners will know this because they're locked on Wild, just like our fans are locked on Penguins. I say this on our show all the time. You can only play the schedule that's put in front of you. You can't call the NHL and treat it like a restaurant and say, excuse me, sir, this competition's not good enough. Could you please bring me a harder game? You can only win the games that are in front of you. But you look at the teams that the Wild have put in the rearview mirror to start the year. St. Louis, fine enough. Columbus, we know what they're going through. But then Florida and Tampa Bay, and then Philly to Pittsburgh. In your estimation, and obviously it is still very early in the season, when you're getting these wins, you obviously want to stack them as early as you can to help you out later in the year. Is this team putting its name in a Western contenders list, or are they kind of coming up on that, or is this an aberration in your estimation from what you're seeing from this Wild team?
Well, I think the biggest thing that has given me hope that this is sustainable is the fact that the Wild have gone from being a top 3 most penalized team in the league the last 3 seasons to dead last in penalties so far this season. And that was something that John Hines talked about, or has talked about extensively, is just being disciplined and being really good with the details. He obviously did a ton of work in training camp to instill that in this team. Like, we gotta be much more disciplined than we have been. And so far it has absolutely worked. Like, they have had games where they don't commit a single penalty. And I don't think they did that maybe once over the last 3 seasons combined. And they've already done that a couple of times so far this season. So if they can continue that, disciplined play, and you're not gonna just string games together where you don't take any penalties, but there's a difference between having to go on the penalty kill 3 to 4 to 5 times a game to 1 to 2. It's a huge difference. And if they keep that up, that gives me confidence that this team can compete for a postseason spot. The goaltending obviously has been really, really good.
Which you're welcome. 2 former Penguins in that area. So, you're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you guys a ton for all that. The 5-on-5 scoring, I think, is the one area that is going to need an upgrade. But guess what? You've got a farm system that is just completely full. Not all those guys are going to make the NHL roster. And so you have ammo to be able to go get somebody. The name that I've thrown out there, just because he's a Minnesota boy, and I'm not suggesting that the Vancouver Canucks are not going to be in contention this year, but you have the ammunition to go out and get a Brock Besser type player. Depending on what happens with Jared Spurgeon, it sounds like he's going to return for tonight's game. If he would be put on long-term injured reserve at some point this season, that's a $7.5 million cap hit that you can use for whoever. And that's a big time ad. And it's just that feels like another way to kind of convince Kirill that you are serious about winning, is by this team being in contention at the trade deadline and going out and making a big swing and saying, all right, Kirill, we know we need to convince you that we're serious about winning. Take a look at this. So I feel like it is sustainable, because I think the Wild have prioritized the right things this season. It's just a matter of execution. And the execution's not going to be there every night, but can it be there more nights than it's not? Will be the key as to how this team does as the season unfolds. Well, let's switch to talking about the guy that everybody is going to be keeping an eye on here tonight. That, of course, being the goalie, the flower, Marc-Andre Fleury. We will talk about Fleury's long career. We'll share some memories of his play for both teams, as well as get you ready for tonight's matchup between the Wild and the Penguins. That's on the way after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Penguins is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Plus, Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. I lost Jordan Mason from my fantasy team on Sunday, and I ended up winning because the Pittsburgh Steelers defense did me a solid and had the punt return touchdown. But I was really sweating what now my entire bench of 6 is just all injured players. You wouldn't have to sweat that, though, with Prize Picks, because if your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Final segment, the Fleury segment of today's crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Penguins. Once again, we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out tonight's game because all eyes are going to be on Marc-Andre Fleury. And so let's just start here. Pat, I'll start with you. What is your favorite from his days in Pittsburgh? What is your favorite Marc-Andre Fleury moment?
It's really easy to say the Secret Service save in 2009 that won them the Stanley Cup, because I joked about the Kaprizov statue. If there's ever a statue for Marc-Andre Fleury, that's going to be it, because it was an iconic moment. But because I've got to be a hockey hipster, I'm going to go with something else. I am a gigantic nerd when it comes to hockey media things like HBO's 24/7, to the point where I go back and watch it when I'm bored. So he was an absolute star in that for multiple reasons. There were silly pranks where they were in a hotel in Buffalo. They took two rookies' rooms and rebuilt them in the hallway, which was absolutely hysterical. But the best part of him in that show was the first practice at then Heinz Field. They did an end of practice shootout. He was the guy with the microphone, and he was talking trash on everyone. It didn't matter if it was Sidney Crosby or a fourth line plugger coming down on him. He was just yapping at them the whole time, to the point where the loser of that shootout, the last person to score, had to take their skates off, put on their shoes, in full gear except for skates, run up to the highest point of Heinz Field and touch the sign at the top of the stands. And it ended up being Jordan Staal. And Fleury was just all over him this entire shootout. Just, oh, here comes Stalzy again. Oh, I'm going to make you climb all the way up there. I'm going to make you climb all the way up there. And it's just the perfect encapsulation of Marc-Andre Fleury, because for a franchise that drafted the most intense athlete maybe of all time in Sidney Crosby, Marc-Andre Fleury's right behind him, smiling, joking, laughing, having a good time, and going, boys, we're getting paid a bunch of money to play a kid's game. This is fun.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Hunter, what about you?
See, going off of that, I think with Pat remembers this, the PSP stuff with Crosby, Fleury, Max Talbot, Ben Lovejoy was on the plane, and Fleury is just trashing everyone. He's trashing Max Talbot. He's making fun of Ben Lovejoy for an injury on the plane that got really big because it swelled really badly. And that entire video was so freaking funny. He pranked Justin Schultz when he got traded here in 2016. That was hilarious. Obviously, I can bring up the save on Lidstrom. That's obviously would be a statue. But to that save on Alex Ovechkin 2017 is still forever ingrained in my memory. Just the way that he was able to stick his stick out, barely save it, and then just taunt him after. You're taunting the greatest goal scorer, at least in my opinion, to ever play in the NHL right after that. And then you go on to shut the Capitals out in that game. Just a remarkable performance from Fleury, especially after there were years where he was really bad in the playoffs for the Penguins. 2012 comes to mind, 2013, but he was able to find his game again. He wasn't used as much in 2016 in the playoffs, but he was very good in the regular season. But 2017, I'll always say it, he started it, but Matt Murray finished it that year. But they don't win the cup without the way Fleury played, especially against Columbus and Washington. And I think people also forget just how good he was in 2008. he was superb for the Penguins in the playoffs that year. You can easily make an argument that that is the best he's played in the playoffs. Honestly, I would subscribe to that argument with the way you look at his .933 save percentage, the way that you look at how the Penguins really had no business going to 6 games against that Red Wings team, but Fleury made it happen in game 5 with the amount of saves that he made in those overtime periods before they won it in triple overtime to send it back to Pittsburgh. Fleury was so good throughout those playoffs, and it's going to be a very emotional night here at PPG Paints Arena. I'm going to be there with one of my friends. I'm sure this place is going to be rocking, even though the Penguins have had a rough start to the season, but Marc-Andre Fleury will forever be Penguins royalty. Pat and I have had the discussion about whether he's going to have his number retired. I lean on the side that I don't think so, but a Ring of Honor, Hall of Honor, I can definitely see for him overall. But this is going to be a very awesome night. And I mean, I could keep going for Marc-Andre Fleury stories forever, but those, again, are just a couple that really come to mind, at least for me.
I have a couple that really stand out to me from his time here so far, and I'll kind of try to build up to the, I think, iconic moment. So one of which was a game last year against the Columbus Blue Jackets in which the Minnesota Wild were trailing late and were trying to go to the empty net. Fleury was in goal. And so he was trying to get to the bench. The Wild had the puck. They lose control in the neutral zone as Fleury is trying to get to the bench. So all of a sudden, like, I see the empty net on the television, and I'm like, okay, empty netter, this game is over. And all of a sudden, I see somebody just come flying in from off the screen, and I'm like, I thought initially it was one of the Wild defensemen. No, it's Fleury. And he goes into a full dive and he sticks his goalie stick out as far as he can get it. And he deflects the puck. He's able to deflect the shot by Columbus into the netting. The Wild end up actually with like 10 seconds left in the game, getting the game tying goal, and they win in overtime. But I'm like, what? What are you doing? And then I was like, oh, actually, no, that's a really good play. Well done. So that one really stands out to me. The prank that he pulled on Brandon Duhaime last year is just all time. After Duhaime bought him a cane for a Secret Santa gift, and also in a in-game interview said he moves around pretty good in the net for a 50-year-old. This was an all-time back and forth between these two. Duhaime ends up getting traded to the Colorado Avalanche. The Minnesota Wild play Colorado, and so Fleury, with the help of I don't even know how many people, gets the tires off of Duhaime's truck and covers the bed in dirt and flowers and just leaves it on blocks in the parking ramp. And so that's number 2 on my list. But number 1 by far, and the only reason that this didn't happen was because of the officials, was the near Jordan Binnington fight. That's the top Fleury moment for me throughout his time. He was ready for it. Binnington was ready for it. The officials just did not let it transpire, and I will forever be bitter about that, because you mean to tell me that that there were people that said, well, it's a good thing he wouldn't have won that fight. Please. Fleury would have absolutely wiped the floor with Jordan Binnington. I'm forever convinced of that. So those are a couple of moments that stand out to me. Obviously, the ultimate competitor, guy who just embodies what it takes to be good for a long time. I mean, still playing in his 40s, 21-year career. There are just a ton of numbers that we could sit and go through that embolden his career, embody what he has done as a goalie. But I think the thing that is going to stick with me about this game, regardless of what happens, is what Fleury said himself after practice yesterday when asked, how do you keep your emotions in check in a game like this? And he said, I'm just going to make sure to take a look around and take it all in. And it's just going to be another game. Like that's I think the Marc-Andre Fleury experience is that it's just another game. It's just another opportunity to help the team win. And so I'm looking forward to what hopefully will be just a really fun night to celebrate an iconic goalie.
Yeah, it's going to be so emotional. And I know that this is going to be a bit of a hard pivot, but I think this is going to be a good chance for the Penguins to break their losing streak, because as much as I love Marc-Andre Fleury and as much as he means to me as a Penguins fan, he's not good against them. And him getting the start tonight, this might be, unfortunately, a clunker for him in net, just because he is historically not very good against the Penguins. So I think it could be a chance for the Penguins to get themselves back in the win column tonight.
Yeah, the thing is, he doesn't usually like playing against the Penguins, just because, Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, Chris Letang, three of his best friends, and with how long he played for the Penguins, he doesn't like going against them. I know I was one of the people, Seth, I was very upset that he didn't start in Pittsburgh last year, because, for all we knew, that could have been his last year in the league. Yeah. Thankfully, he returned this year, but everyone was so upset. But then again, I don't think he really likes playing this team. But you got to do it this last time, your final season. Come on. But it's going to be a special night. It's going to be rocking there. And I'm super excited to see how the Penguins come out. I think they're going to come out a lot better tonight. I think you'll see them tighten up, hopefully a little bit more defensively. I think they're going to want to put on a good showing for the fans, considering how awful this road trip was.
Yeah, and on the Minnesota Wild side of things, trying to bounce back after their first real clunker of the season against the Philadelphia Flyers, obviously going to want to get off to a better start. Gave up 2 goals in the first few minutes of the game against Philly. So the Wild will be looking to get off to a better start. This is going to be a big game for the defense to try to help Fleury out. The number 1 defense in the NHL, according to expected goals against. Humble brag. So hopefully the defense can help Fleury out a little bit. I think we're going to see a lot of what we have seen throughout his career. You're going to get some of those windmill saves. You're also going to have a goal or two that you look at and you say, boy, going to probably need that one back. But I think my official call for this one is a 4-3 win in OT for the Minnesota Wild. And the game-winning goal, Kirill.
Of course.
Just getting one step closer to the statue.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're putting in the foundation right now. Next is the footings. So, fellas, great episode today. Thanks for hopping in to talk about this one, to talk a little bit about Marc-Andre Fleury, and we'll see how things go here tonight. Listeners, make sure, again, to hit that like button and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on one of the many audio platforms, we appreciate having you along for the ride as well. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Apple, on Spotify. It helps with distribution of these shows tremendously. You can find new episodes of both Locked On Wild and Locked On Penguins every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.